quite a lot of people didn't repay because they were dead. That was it's sort of, I'm a bit dead, so I can't pay you back, mate. Sorry.
Hi, and welcome to Basis Point, the only financial podcast in the world to talk about the Knights Templar. Yes, the guys with the suit of armor captured the imagination of storytellers and fantasy writers throughout the world. Bear with me, you'll understand in a minute, and I guarantee you're gonna love it. We met Steve Tibble today, one of the foremost historians of the Knights Templar, a former finance professional, and the author of several books that dismantle centuries of myth with intellectual clarity and a serious dose of humor. The Templars are usually remembered as fearless warriors serving both king and pope, but that narrative misses what made them truly exceptional. They're also diplomats, administrators, and the architects of a surprisingly advanced financial infrastructure. Long before modern banking, they enabled secure transfers of money from the English kingdom to the Holy Land. Deposit here, withdraw there, funding logistics, infrastructure, and long-term development across borders. And they achieved this without central banks, modern courts, or proper rule of law. What held the system together was trust, reputation, and political legitimacy. That concentration of financial power made them indispensable and eventually deeply unsettling. If you like our content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's plenty more to come. So let's dive right into the myths, the fears, and the collapse to understand how it actually all went down. Steve Tibble, tell us, who were the Templars and what exactly are we doing here talking about them on a financial podcast?
Well, Sharif, you're absolutely right. It is kind of weird to be talking about the 12th century in terms of modern finance, but weirdly, there are a lot of resonating points of contact between the Templars and modern private equity. I worked in private equity on the communications side for several decades, as well as being a medieval historian. And I was always struck by the strange connectivity in terms of the feel for the organizations involved. There is a strange resonance there. And the Templars, I'm sure you know this already, but the Templars are a group of monks for practical purposes. They're professed religious. These are guys who sign up for a difficult life. They promise to be celibate, they promise to be poor, and they promise to fight for the Holy Land, which is a very dangerous job. So they're likely to die very quickly and not have relations with women. So on the one level, this sounds like a pretty, why would you volunteer for that job? But the reason that people were queuing up to do it was because they were the elite. They were the elite warriors of Europe, but they were also, and that's something I hope we talk about later, they were the elite in many other respects as well. They were, in effect, the kind of professional services elite of Europe. And people, it's a bit like being James Bond, but maybe with more brains, so that, women wanted them, men wanted to be them. So there was this whole attraction to it. And they were devoted to defending the Christian communities of the Holy Land during the 12th and 13th centuries.
This kind of mythical aura they have today kind of started pretty early on.
Yeah, absolutely. They always were a kind of an elite group. The weird thing about the mythology is that it's so different from the truth.
Let's start by kind of debunking the biggest myths about the Knights Templar.
Well, you look at the internet, there's a whole world of hurt out there. You just type in the word Templar and it's like crazies coming straight at you. It's like a zombie apocalypse. But they really were extraordinary. And the sad thing is, you don't need to make up stuff about them, because what they actually did was extraordinary. The way they were was extraordinary. And it's kind of insulting that you get all this crazy madness around them. And I think there's two big myths at the moment, though I'm sure it'll change because the internet's a moving organism. Firstly is that they were devil worshippers, Satanists, and that's a complete misnomer. They were basically closed down by the French monarchy because the French monarchy borrowed money from them and wanted to write off its debts and they were a cash cow for Philip the Fair when he was short of cash. And to close the order down and to write his debts off, he accused them of all sorts of crazy things, including devil worship, which is obviously crazy. And the only reason any of them ever confessed to it was because they were being tortured to death, and many of them were tortured to death rather than perjure themselves. So devil worshippers, no. The other current one, which is probably just as insulting, maybe more insulting, is that they are some kind of Aryan nation, racist organization out to destroy the Middle East. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They were not interested in ethnic issues at all. I think we're all a bit obsessed with it at the moment. In the 12th century, people were much more concerned about religion than ethnicity. Often you look at the characters in the Crusades on all sides, and you've no idea what their ethnicity is.
Because the image I have of the Templars in the Middle East is that they were violent, bloodthirsty, disrespectful of local customs, and very self-centered.
That's the mythology. In fact, they were, the average guy in a Templar army in the Middle East was an Arab, or an Armenian, or a Syrian. Yeah. I'm writing a book with my lovely wife, Dr. Steve Tibble, called, on this very subject. It's called Arabian Nights, and it's about demythologizing that whole thing, that actually most people in most of those Crusader armies were local Arabs, local Armenians, Syrians. They were the local Christians, and the local Christians were still the majority population in the 12th century. So the idea that the Templars are out there to, give other ethnicities a good kicking couldn't be further from the truth. They were dying to save the local Arabs.
So they were basically sent in the Middle East to protect the Christians?
Yeah. If you think of it, Christianity started in the Middle East, and, the Roman Empire became Christian. So until the Muslim invasions of the 7th century, the whole area was Christian. Egypt was a Christian country, Palestine was Christian, local Arabs were pretty much all Christian, small Jewish community, but otherwise a Christian region. Then Muslims invade in the 7th century, then you get more invasions in the 11th century, and so the Crusades are born, and the Byzantines, who are Orthodox Christians, call for help from the West, and you find that there's a kind of a pushback and a defensive war to try and protect the Christian communities.
Between Western Europe and the Middle East, they had to have communication routes and resource transfers, and this is maybe where it's starting to make sense for our audience why we're here today.
Exactly. And you're very clever, Sharif. You put your finger on it there. The key to it all is understanding that you can be warmongers in the East. They were elite soldiers. That's what they were there to do, to fight a defensive war on the frontiers of the Holy Land. But in the West, they were massive peacemongers. Their job was to make sure that European kings were not distracted by civil wars, to make sure that horses and volunteers were shipped over, to make sure that money in particular, we'll come back to that key thing, is shipped to the East as well. So they, as well as being super professional kind of Jason Bourne soldiers, they're also really Europe's first professional services conglomerate. They become this weird combination of Goldman Sachs, Alan Novery. They become the best lawyers, the best bankers, the best diplomats, to try and keep European resources shifting over to the East, where they can be massive warmongers.
So they were extremely clever, powerful, but there were very few.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the reasons why when I worked in private equity, because I did my PhD before I, ever worked in finance. That's where I found it resonating, because you actually have a tiny group of people who are super committed, super clever, elite, and they're doing wonderful things, vastly out of proportion to their numbers. Now, I always felt that you go into any private equity house, and the number of individuals making the decisions relative to the size of the assets is so disproportionate, and yet a good firm can be such a professional hand on that tiller. There's that kind of professional connection.
And so getting back to their role as financial professionals in the medieval times, how exactly did they transfer money from West to East? Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah. It's I have to say, I don't think they, strictly speaking, invented investment banking, because the Romans have been doing that. The Greeks have been doing it. I'm sure China was doing that, India and so on.
Transferring resources to develop other places locally.
I'm sure banking systems and money transfer existed, but it's certainly in Europe it's called the Dark Ages, and historians aren't allowed to call it Dark Ages anymore. But seriously, things, shares can go down as well as up, and Europe did go down. Yeah, and the Templars and the Italian city-states that they worked with were really instrumental in reinvigorating it. And what they used to do was, you have to understand it from the perspective of what they were trying to achieve. So they want, basically, they want resources to go over to the east to provide nice castles, lots of mercenary soldiers, money for the troops, the local Arabs who are defending their own territory, and so on. So how do you make that happen in a time when there's a lot of Europe doesn't even have a money economy? There's no real logistics. If you give me 100 quid, it's probably going to be in coins, and it's going to be in a huge chest. How do you get that chest from Northumberland down to Jerusalem? It's crazy. So they effectively invent this system of transfer by trust. So you'd take your money. If you wanted to, say you're feeling generous, and pious, like many of them were, you give your money to the Templars or the other orders like the Hospitallers, and they would take your money and write you a little note, promissory note.
It's an IOU.
Exactly, like every banknote. And they would then ship it down to London, which was the local provincial headquarters here. Then it might go, by system of notes, would go to Paris, and then from Paris out to the different parts of the Latin East.
But we're talking about literal notes?
Yeah, pieces of paper, or pieces of vellum maybe in those days. But yeah, no, so it's surprisingly advanced, but you can see they're not doing it to make money per se, because they actually have vows of poverty. It's to make sure that the war effort is being funded, and so you want to do it in the cleanest way possible. The other thing is, if you're keen on crusading, you want to encourage knights to volunteer. So you could be a knight in Durham or somewhere like that. You're a bit strapped for cash. You'd love to go and fight for the good cause as you see it out in the Middle East, but you can't afford it. So the Templars might lend you money, and what they might do is give you a promissory note. So you'd maybe have £10 to see you to Jerusalem, and then there'd be £80 waiting for you there, and you could pay your men when you get there. So they're kind of funding lots of different aspects.
Whose interests were they serving? There were knights, they were religious. Are they serving the king, or are they serving the Pope?
Yeah, no, you're very cool. That again, that really gets to the nub of it. And I think it's hard to imagine how religious everybody was in the 12th century, and not just in Europe. I mean, the Middle East, everybody was super religious, whether you're Muslim or Christian or any variation of that. So they behave in a way that is very difficult for us to understand. They, even if you go to mosque or go to church every week, they really believed that their immortal souls were at risk whenever they did something bad, in a way that perhaps you and I wouldn't, even though obviously we're very devout ourselves, of course. So they've got this kind of religious background that's overriding. They were set up by the Pope. Now that's the clue. So the Pope is the only unifying aspect to Europe in those days. If you think Europe is disunited now, you haven't seen the Middle Ages. It's so localized and so fragmented. The local knights barely reported to the barons. The barons grudgingly perhaps thought the king might be okay, but he was like first amongst equals, and then all the kings hated each other's guts from time to time. So Europe was fragmented. So the only way of getting resources out to the east was to have somebody overseeing it and saying, guys, get your act together, stop fighting amongst each other, And the Templars were the kind of the muscular arm. They were the church militant, and they were the muscular arm of the papacy, saying, let's do this.
So could they put kings back in their place?
Well, very good point. They had a very tricky line to follow. They ultimately reported to the Pope, but if you're an English Templar operating out of London,
you don't want to cross the king.
You don't cross the king, yeah. And actually, you've got every interest in helping the king, because you want the king to go on crusade. So they're highly motivated to make themselves useful.
That's, diplomacy at its essence, really.
Their diplomats were working full-time, 24 hours a day, trying to keep everybody afloat and stop fighting breaking out. So this is where they're rabid peacemongers in the West and elite soldiers in the East. So for instance, you end up with the Templars even supporting kings who are incredibly rubbish, like King John, famously rubbish king. But the Templars are almost the only people who stuck by him because a king is the only person who can really launch a crusade. So even though I suspect they knew he was about as crap a king as you're going to get, that he was still what they had to deal with.
So because they were serving the institution.
Exactly right. But then if push came to shove, they worked for the papacy. And they always tried very hard not to show that. I think everyone knew it, but you try not to rub people's noses in it.
And so you said they lent money to knights, possibly. Back at the time, did they have any sort of collateral? I mean, what if you don't repay them?
Quite a lot of people didn't repay because they were dead. That was it's sort of I'm a bit dead, so I can't pay you back, mate. Sorry. So there's a lot of that. You have to think a lot of it is not a money economy anyway, but land is land, and this is a very agricultural economy. So if you're a knight, the basis of feudalism is you own landed property, and so you might sign those lands over to the Templars as surety for the loan or what have you.
Because I mean, the way you're depicting them, they seem wise, they seem powerful, but I'm sure nobody really wanted to get in their way.
No, actually, it is interesting. They are so muscular. They are actually employed as bodyguards and bouncers by important people. So the King of Scotland used to have them as a kind of bodyguard detachment. They would literally walk him into a room if it was looking rough. You've seen Game of Thrones. You know what it's like. It's horrible. And the same in England. If you go back, just the example of King John, he was such an unpopular guy. He was always fighting his own people. If he had to pay his troops, often he would ask the Templars to look after the money for him because they were his bankers. The Templars had the crown jewels, so they looked after that. They were the only people he trusted. But when he went to pay his guys, there would be a Templar detachment. These monks would be riding with the cash because they were the best soldiers. So yeah, it's amazingly tough.
So they're the toughest and most trustworthy.
Yeah.
The best of the best, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. The best soldiers, but also the best professional services. I'm not blowing smoke up anybody, but I do think on a good day, a good private equity firm is like that. They're not pussycats, but they are tough and they're super clever and super focused.
Why should people today care about the Templars' affairs?
I mean, obviously, the world of finance is hugely more complex than it was then, but I think there are some aspects of it that have remained very simple. If you take the high level, these were guys who, I think I'm clever if I open up my laptop in the morning. That makes me a clever person. It's rubbish, really. I'm not resourceful at all. But they used to wake up and they had nothing. They had no resources. They had to work a lot harder to do the things that we take for granted. So one of the benefits, I think, is that they became very good at strategy. They had so few resources. They had continually to be good at strategy and take the helicopter view. And I think that's something we can all learn from. And B, I think it's what a good management team and a good private equity company is excellent at. It is taking that longer term view. I mean, they were making decisions to defend a country for so far away, it was like science fiction, for a period of 200 years. I mean, these are not, quarterly reports for investors. These were guys who had a hugely profound grasp of strategy and a length of vision because they're working for the papacy, which has existed for 2,000 years. They were really strategic in a way that we struggle to be.
And they kind of, just struck me now, they probably needed to understand all of the microcultures from London to
Absolutely.
to Damascus.
Yeah, and actually, that's apropos your earlier point. There is this mythology that they were somehow aggressive to other cultures. Couldn't be further from the truth. They were the ones who had the best contacts with the courts of all the local Muslim rulers. They were the most respected. When people wanted surety or diplomatic connections, they nearly always called out to the Templars because they knew how it worked. They were really subtle.
And yet today we kind of remember them as secretive conspirators. I mean, if you look at modern popular culture, you look at Assassin's Creed or what's it called? Dan Brown's book, the Da Vinci Code.
And the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail.
Exactly. Or even a few decades ago, the Last Crusade, Indiana Jones.
Yeah, which is fabulous. We can't say it back.
Why did we create this?
There's a germ of truth, as in these guys were kind of legends in their own lifetime. So they were elite and they were larger than life. But it's become so distorted.
They're clearly bad guys in Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I love Assassin's Creed. I mean, and in fairness to Assassin's Creed, it's a fantasy. It's not even a historic fashion. It's a science fiction fantasy game. But I do love it. And interestingly, I wrote a book last year called Assassins and Templars, which is based by Yale University Press, lovely people. And it's looking at the back history of Assassin's Creed, and some of it is surprisingly historic. But then some of it is almost like an homage to this non-existent but larger-than-life organization. Yeah, I think, on the one hand, it's lovely that they still have a life in our imaginations. I do find it slightly annoying because they are so extraordinary themselves. The organization that we've just talked about, who managed to be elite warriors, elite bankers, elite diplomats, you don't need
to invent anything.
Absolutely.
It's all there already, and it's great.
Yeah, they're fabulous.
If the Knights Templar existed today, what do you think the role in society would be? They'd probably be running the show, no?
Yeah, it depends which path they took. I mean, I think you could see a kind of dark Templar side where they could perhaps be running the country and pulling the strings. They could be political puppeteers, that could be Illuminati.
Conspiracy theorists are going to have a field day with this, I'm sure.
But I like to think, and most of the historical evidence would suggest, that there's a kind of a light Templar, which is basically, they would be a combination of the World Bank, the UN, European Union peacekeeping force, if there ever was such a thing. We're still fragmented. But if, they would be the people who would be internationalists at a very high intellectual, but also muscular level. And there's something very powerful about that. I think that's why they've resonated.
Maybe the world would actually be more stable if they were still here.
Yeah, well, the Templars' world would be. I mean, it's sort of, obviously they had an agenda, which you may or may not agree with, but it's, they weren't an evil bunch. What they were doing was entirely rational within their own worldview, which clearly differed from other
like
people's
private equity.
Exactly.
Steve, thank you very much. We're going to continue this conversation and dive a little bit deeper in the parallels between private equity and the Templars' financial system.
Lovely, thank you.
And we will be back in the second episode to talk just about that. That's it for today. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Basis Points YouTube channel.